Are you there, David?
You're aware of a deeper existence.
Are you there, David? Are you there, David?
Maybe a temporary reassurance that indeed there is no beginning, no end. And you find yourself struggling to comprehend a deep mystery.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers want to know whose shirts you wear.
Ever since I was 16, I was determined we'd have the greatest adventure that any one person could ever have.
I'm an alligator. I'm a mama papa calling for you. I'm the space invader. I'll be a rock and roller bitch for you.
And how about the shoes? Are those men's shoes or women's shoes or bisexual shoes? They're shoes, silly. What's your fantasy?
Bowie.
That was the trailer for the BAFTA-nominated documentary Moonage Daydream, and this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. Moonage Daydream is a cinematic odyssey exploring David Bowie's creative and musical journey. Who better than to create that odyssey than Oscar-nominated and Emmy-winning director Brett Morgen, who also edited, produced, and wrote the film. With the blessing of the Bowie estate, Brett has created a work of cinematic art that is considered one of the year's best films by scores of reviewers and has been described as the most immersive rock film of all time by IndieWire, a cinematic tour de force by Deadline, a stunning achievement in editing by RogerEbert.com, and a scintillating psychedelic masterwork by none other than NME. You get the idea. Join us as Brett discusses the creative process and what it is like to work in total isolation to bring this masterpiece to the big screen. This one promises to be special, so stay tuned. Brett Morgen, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Things are great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Just to remind our listeners and viewers, we're talking about Moonage Daydream. I think it's, according to the official announcement, it's found everywhere, but do catch it in a cinema or movie theater if at all possible, I would stress. So welcome again to Factual America. Congratulations on the Oscar nomination, the BAFTA nomination, and all the accolades that have come with this film. You must be ecstatic.
We didn't get an Oscar nomination, but thank you for the.
Someone. I thought you did. Someone threw. Okay, BAFTA.
It's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
We got some other ones, so we're good.
Okay. Well, let's. That's my bad, and we'll. You should have. That's what I'll say. But I was wondering what IMDb was doing with just saying. Anyway, that's another story. You must, anyway, with all the accolades and everything that's come your way, you must be relieved, ecstatic. How are you feeling at the moment about all this?
I mean, I've been feeling completely buoyant since we premiered the film at Cannes. I feel like my feet haven't really touched the ground since then. And it's just been an incredible ride, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, usually on this podcast, we ask filmmakers to give us a synopsis of the film. I don't think that's appropriate here. I think actually a better question, at least in my view, is what is Moonage Daydream?
What is Moonage Daydream? Moonage, I mean, like, what is a Moonage Daydream, or
what is the film? I mean,
Moonage
who usually asks,
Daydream?
what is the film about? The film's,
It's a
you know,
movie.
it's a movie, yes.
It's a it's a movie. It's a movie about David Bowie. It's a movie. Actually, it's a movie about Bowie in quotation. Yeah, about the sort of energy, the force of energy that is Bowie.
Because you've been at least some. I've been at pains to describe it as not as a documentary per se.
It's so dumb. I don't understand that. The thing. It's obviously a documentary. It's just that the word documentary carries with it a very narrow sort of definition for most people. Unlike fiction, we don't refer to Nope as a fiction film. Nobody's referring to Avatar as a fiction film or the Batman as a fiction film. We don't say that. We say it's a superhero film, or it's a horror film, or it's a genre-bending film, or it's a rom-com. In documentary, just have this like one label, which is even more confusing because traditionally it's been a journalistic endeavor. So, I think the best thing we could do at the moment is at least have like two sort of subgenres, like journalistic and impressionistic. It seems like that would sort of cover just about any nonfiction film, because I'd much rather someone approach Moonage knowing that they're coming into an impressionistic nonfiction film.
It's interesting because I would have thought the last few years everyone's talking about this golden age of documentaries and all this stuff. I mean, you would have thought that we wouldn't have
golden age of streaming. It's been the death of golden age. I make theatrical documentaries. It is not a golden age right now.
Well, that is a I find that very interesting, and I think it's you're. One thing we were gonna ask is it's 20. Well, you've been nominated for an Oscar for one of your films. That's 23 years ago. I mean, how have things changed over that period for the industry, and how have they not changed?
Oh, well, I was nominated in 2000.
Yeah.
For my first film, which was my thesis film from NYU. It was called On the Ropes.
Right.
And back then, when we got nominated, I had to scroll on the internet to find out, and we didn't do anything. We didn't. There was no campaign. There was no publicist.
Yeah.
There were no screenings. There was no advertisement. We showed up for Oscar weekend, and during that 4-month period or 3-month period, I was able to do pre-production on The Kid Stays in the Picture, and it was exciting, and it costs a lot less money than things do today.
Yeah. So Moonage Daydream. How did you become involved with this project? I mean, was it your idea? Did you approach Bowie's estate? How did this happen?
No one ever hires me to do anything. I have to hire myself. So yeah, I kind of forced myself onto this. No, I'd come up with an idea. I met with David in 2007 to discuss a different type of movie, and the timing for that didn't work out. And in 2015, a year before he passed, I came up with this idea to do something called the IMAX Music Experience. And the idea of the IMAX Music Experience was I was going to do a series of 15, 40-minute, non-linear IMAX music experiences to live in perpetuity in the science halls and take over the evening positioning. So it'd be like 7 o'clock Beatles, 8 o'clock Zeppelin, 9 o'clock, Beyonce, et cetera. And, at 40 minutes, you don't really need a plot. And what I was interested in was taking music and playing it in the greatest sound system available to the audience, which is IMAX. And so that's where it started. And then David when David passed, I called his executor, who I had met with years earlier, pitched him what I was interested in doing. And, he said that David had pretty much saved everything throughout the years, and had told him that he did not want to participate in a traditional talking head documentary, that Bowie felt that in those type of movies, the experts kind of end up owning the history and the truth. And it was something, I guess, that he, just wasn't that interested in. So my take of doing this kind of non-biographical music experience really resonated with Bill. At that point, I had no idea where I would go on this journey, or that it would go from this 40-minute razzle dazzle to a 2.5 hour life-affirming odyssey. Really ended up taking on a life of its own. And I should say that it was originally designed to be like a 1-year endeavor, and ended up, taking the better part of 7 years.
Oh my God. So, I mean, how does one go about making a film about, you've told about how you've approached the estate, but how do you go about making a film about David Bowie? We had someone who, or how do you go about making a film about a cultural icon or artistic genius?
Well, I've been doing this for 20 years now with these cultural icons like Bob Evans and Jane Goodall and Kurt Cobain. To answer your question earnestly, you look for a through line of action. You enter the project understanding that you're not going to cover everything, and that particularly with someone like Bowie, with Kurt, he was in the public eye for 3 years and lived such a short life that it was possible to really go kind of cradle to grave in the course of a little over 2 hours. With someone like David Bowie, that's just not even within the realm of possibility. So, and if you attempt to do it, you sort of end up with Cliff Notes to history. So just by virtue of the format, that being IMAX and cinema, it kind of suggests a certain type of film. With all my movies, I like to say I make movies that aren't about the subject, that aren't information based. They're experiential, and they're meant to kind of be the experience of the subject in a uniquely cinematic way. And so that's kind of how I've approached nonfiction. And so Bowie, at the end of the day, readily lent himself to this sort of endeavor, both in the sense that one can track a non-biographical narrative with Bowie that addresses his creative process as well as his spiritual journey. Bowie's life was his art, and the way he approached life and his philosophy towards life was very much in sync with his art, which again makes for a very contained through line.
Mm. And I think I try not to read reviews or even watch or read other people's interviews, but
I wish I could say the same.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't have any reviews of myself, but I've seen some reference that you were you're inspired by Bowie's artistic techniques and principles, and you incorporated those into everything you did in putting the film together. Is that correct? And what links did you have to go to in order to achieve that?
Well, that's always, when I did Montage of Heck, I had found a tape that Kurt Cobain had created called Montage of Heck. And I like to say that tape was the blueprint for how to construct the film. I suppose that what the kid says in the picture, Bob's book, very much helped define and lead how I would approach that. With Bowie, I made a film about an artist's creative process. And so everything he's saying about his work is applicable to how I would go about making this film. And so if you watch the film and you want to know what I did, just listen to him. He's actually telling the viewer what I'm doing, almost moment by moment, step by step. So, there were some of these ideas were abstract. Some of them were, get out of your comfort zone. Sometimes they were more kind of overt, where I had the oblique strategy cards that I would incorporate, almost hourly. But in essence, he provided a kind of roadmap on how to create and construct the film, and how to surround myself with like-minded collaborators who were willing to play in the sandbox.
And so, as part of that, do you try? I mean, is it conscious? Do you try to live up to his artistic genius? You almost, I mean, you have to.
No, I'm an intellectual midget next to Bowie. I mean, that was the thing that I was most concerned about, was that, filmically, as a nonfiction director working in archives, I feel very confident in approaching a subject like David Bowie. In terms of intensive immersion, I'm a method director, so I don't approach my subjects from the outside looking in. I try to approach it from the inside looking out. And so, like a method actor, when I'm working on a film, I like to inhabit the culture of my subjects. So when I was writing The Kid Stays in the Picture, even though it's not a verite film, I lived with Bob Evans for a year as I worked on the script, so I could soak in his influences and inspirations. I knew what music he liked, what he liked to eat, all of his kind of these little things that an actor would want to kind of absorb, not because they need to know what he ate, but because they want to be prepared for any situation that they may find themselves in. With Bowie, with Bob, that was manageable. And with Kurt, that seemed manageable. With Jane, that seemed manageable, in part because all those subjects were very singular in their pursuits. Bowie was someone who read, traveled with like a chest of like 1,000 books, and was so well read and educated, self-educated, that there was no way from the time I got the assignment to the time I finished that I could even come close. It was like the Tower of Babel. There was no way I could absorb all of that. So that was very intimidating coming into it, knowing that I know there's no way that I can possibly come close to looking at him eye to eye on that level. But of course, I wasn't writing an essay, I was making a film. So it only needed to, it got to a level I could look at.
Well, I think that takes us to a good point for a quick break for our listeners and viewers. We'll be right back with the award-winning director of Moonage Daydream, nominated for a BAFTA, and that's Brett Morgen, who also edited, produced, and wrote the film. Available, I think, just about everywhere, certainly online, and look for it on a big screen somewhere near you, or even IMAX, I gather. And check Brett out also on his Twitter feed, Brett Morgen. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Brett Morgen, director of Moonage Daydream. We were talking about your creative process. You went through what you were, in putting this incredible film together. The film makes a lot of, at least I felt like, makes a lot of reference to sort of, Bowie, through Bowie, largely sort of the isolation of the artist, and also, I gather from you, and this is a 7-year process, and you were director, producer, editor, writer. Was this an isolated process for you? Were you in kind of isolation part of this period, and does that reflect? Does the film reflect your own experience, or are you reflecting Bowie's, or are you reflecting both? I guess is that a combination of all those things?
Yeah, well, who's to say? It's just kind of endless.
It just flows.
Feedback loop. Yeah, it's a sort of loop. I don't, up until I locked picture and started collaborating with the sound team and Stefan Edelman on the visual effects, it was as isolated and lonely an endeavor as one can do in the world of cinema, because there was no one else. I was by myself. You can't get much more isolated than that.
And was that intentional?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, at some point, yes. I don't think it didn't start out that way. The pandemic came around, budgetary issues came around. There were a couple other producers when I started that, we sort of, the film it was a 7-year process. So, by the couple years in, I was by myself. There were no notes from the financiers. They weren't given the film until it was finished. And so at that point, like a couple years in, yes, it was by design. At a couple years in, I'm like, I have to fight my way out of this. This is on me. And I'm not saying that in it's not an enviable thing. It was really dumb, and it was not smart, and it was really problematic, to say the least. But I don't know how I could have arrived where I did without it. I mean, it really did feel, you started this conversation asking me about awards, and I could tell you with absolute clarity that for years putting this film together, there was no thought of awards or audiences. It was just, can I pull this off? Can I make a film? Like, that was just like, is this a language? Does this work from beginning, middle to end? I just didn't, there were times, most of the time during those first 6 years, it did not seem like it was going to happen. And I couldn't give money. I couldn't give the money back. And I had no one to sort of help me get out of this mess. So it was, but again, like I said, at some point I understood that I put myself in that environment and realized that I have been creating these kind of chaotic situations anyway through most of my projects. This one just was, the pandemic hit too. That was really, talk about feeding and isolation. I have a heart condition. And so before the vaccine, I wasn't allowed to be near my children or anyone. So I was completely isolated, sleeping in the office next to the Avid. I took the project for 5 months to Hawaii, where I was quarantined on the Big Island, and went months without seeing a person. Alex, my assistant editor, would remote into the system when I'd go for a walk, and but I had a phone buddy back in LA. But yeah, it was anyway. It was a long ride.
And I mean, what did you learn about yourself in that process?
What did I learn about myself? Well, I certainly, learned that, the cliche that anything is possible if you're determined and you set your sights on it. I mean, like I said, just completing a sentence, just having a film that you can go from beginning to end in this kind of presentation was something that, was setting the, it was yeah. And then in the bigger picture, I'm still absorbing the lessons, because while I was making the film, I learned so much, but I wasn't able to necessarily apply it because I couldn't breathe while I was making it. This was a catch-22 of this film. I was learning all of these lessons about how to create a balance and how to let go, and I wanted to live by it, but I couldn't, because if I wasn't editing, no one was moving the film forward. So it's really now that the film's done that I'm really beginning to feel the levity, the buoyancy of this whole experience.
Well, and I think I've seen reference to you saying it's the film or working on Bowie taught you about balance and I think had a profound change in your life. I mean, is that, is working ridiculous hours, that's just kind of par for the course, isn't it, for the industry? Or that doesn't have to be that way?
Not
is
anymore.
Yeah.
Not anymore for me. Unfortunately, I think it does have to be that way when you're creating. I mean, I don't know any other way to go about it. It's how does one put a premium or a time limit on their passion? I mean, these projects, there was not nearly a minute over 7 years where I wasn't thinking of David, and I found a way to always think about David. So when I was exercising, I was listening to his music or listening to podcasts about him. When I was driving, I was listening to music. I went to sleep listening to the music. It was everywhere. It was, yeah.
Yeah. And so with these lessons, I mean, I think we're actually about to come to the end of our time together, Brett. But now that you're trying to, you're still flying all over the globe. You're coming to us from Israel on this record. I think you're in my way next week. You'll be in the UK, I think, for a screening. But as you implement these lessons and this balance, what's next for you? Do you have anything that's that you can tell us about that's next on the horizon for you, or is it about taking a break after these seven long years?
I don't have anything that I really want to. I have nothing that I want to do right now. Like first time in my career, I'm kind of don't feel like doing much, and that has taken me a lifetime to get here, and to feel like I'm good. If that was my last film, I am thrilled that I had that opportunity and that experience. And I kind of, there was a moment as I was making it, and I said to my wife, I said, I think this may be my last film. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I feel it more now. I mean, knock on wood, but I really feel satiated, and I not that, and I don't want to do it again.
Right.
It's not like, oh wow, that was so great, let's go do it again. No, I don't want to do it again. That was really difficult.
If that's what it takes, yeah.
And I don't want to do half of it. I don't want to do something sort of half-assed. So we'll see what happens. But it's I think that the lessons that were applicable to me working with Bowie are really applicable to all of us, and that was one of the beautiful things about the opportunity to work on this film, is that Bowie's message, it applies whether you're a day laborer, a school teacher, a nurse, a surgeon, a filmmaker. It's about finding a way to get the most out of each day, and about maximize our experience given the brevity of life. And it's simple. And whoever thought David Bowie would be this, prophet of positivity and, almost like syrupy life lessons, but he he lived his life by example, and so it's just, and he was so comfortable in his skin. I mean, I watched every frame, for 2 years, and it was just, he was always present and always learning and viewing each moment as an opportunity for an exchange, for growth. And I think that it's he provided he was obviously an incredible artist, but there's so much more to draw inspiration from.
And ultimately, whether conscious or not, is that what you want the message of the film to be, or at least one of them?
Yeah, no, I think that the messages of the film is live each day to the fullest. I mean, I never thought I would make a film in which the message was that sort of simplistic. Not that Moonage Daydream is a simple film, but ultimately, if you had to distill it to a single idea, that's what it is. I mean, and I guess, by the way, at the end of The Kid Stays in the Picture, Bob's sitting for an interview, and the interviewer says, "Was it worth it?" And Bob takes a long pause, and he goes, yeah, it was worth it. Let me tell you what, most of us spend most of our life at our work. I happen to love what I do. So yeah, it's worth it. Damn right, it's worth it. Jane says the same thing at the end of Jane. She talks about what an amazing life it's been. I just realized this. I think she might even say, I'd love to do it again. She says something along the lines of like, I'd love to do it again, is the final line of that film, which is what Bowie says in Moonage. Obviously, Kurt, life was a struggle, every day. It was kind of a Montage of Heck is really the polar opposite of Moonage Daydream in every way, really. But I do think, I think that, I've been very blessed that I've had these characters. I've got to make films about characters who love what they do and are able to communicate that love to all of us, and it's particularly, I think, coming after Montage. Jane was such a positive film, and I was not expecting Bowie to be as, in a way, it's more upbeat than Jane, I think.
Well, I guess if you do make another film, you'll have to find someone else. You'll have to find another one of these people who are of this cut of this same cloth, I guess, in terms of the living life to the fullest, won't you?
Yeah, I like.
And where do you find
this? Is the trap. There's like no. Oh, there's that other Bowie type.
Exactly.
That like we all like. Oh yeah, you're right. I forgot about that person. Look, there's amazing artists who I'd love to collaborate with. There's people like Janelle Monáe and incredible younger artists who are so talented. But yeah, man, Bowie, once in a lifetime. That was the documentarians, hole in one, just to land that assignment was such a privilege.
Yeah. Well, what I'll say is, at least for me, and whether it was what you intend or not, I felt like for the first time I really I wouldn't say understood, but appreciated and really understand who Bowie really was and still is.
And again, that goes back to, I think, thank you. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation about not trying to fit everything in. And so by not trying to fit everything in, what you're able to do is get a context for these movements, which enable you to piece together this broad section of his career without feeling like it's Wikipedia. So that you're actually, if you're a casual Bowie fan, like I was going into this, who never read a book, you're like, oh, wow. I guess if I'd read a book, I would have known that he abandoned songwriting and went to Berlin and did this thing. But I kind of never pieced that together. I didn't realize how extreme that was. And I was around at the time. I didn't realize that Let's Dance was a design. He had designed, he wanted to go into the mainstream as a social experiment. Like I didn't see it like that. And and again, if I had tried to mention every album and every date, we would have never arrived at that sort of conclusion.
And I guess finally, would you say that was an advantage that you came into this as a casual fan? If you had been a big, avid Bowie fan, would that have made it more difficult, you think?
I don't think so. I given the fact that I was able to access his entire archive, I think even the most ardent, well-versed fan would have been in awe at the totality of his kindness and intelligence. Like, it never faltered. I'm looking at 2 years of media. This is like thousands and thousands of hours of this human being who, if you were a hardcore fan before, you'd be like, oh yeah, he's the greatest. But there's probably a moment or two where it was, people say David's otherworldly. I started to feel he was otherworldly only because I didn't see the fallibility. I saw the vulnerability. I just didn't see the fallibility. I never, 84 to 87, he goes off the rails a little bit, but that was a necessary equation, and he accepted it with grace and dignity.
As he, I guess, as my understanding is how he approached his death as well, and so even in death was lived up to this, as you say, this infallibility. Brett, I think I'm sure your assistants will be asking me to let you go because I know you've got another interview coming up. But just wanted to thank you again for coming on to the podcast with Factual America. It's very much appreciated. Very, very much enjoyed our chat. And just remind our listeners, we've been talking with Brett Morgen, director, editor, producer, and writer of the BAFTA-nominated Moonage Daydream. Do check it out. You will be, I know, very impressed. And also follow Brett at Brett Morgen, at Brett Morgen on his Twitter account. Do you have and any other social media that he's active on? You're active on social media, Brett. So thank you so much again, and good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Take care. I also would like to thank those who helped make this podcast possible. A big shout out to Sam and Joe at Intersound Audio in York, England. A big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. Many of you have been with us for 4 incredible seasons. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.